A serial killer targeted me. My sister-in-law was assaulted and murdered while trying to save me. Not only did I refuse to call the police, I pushed my father-in-law and mother-in-law down a flight of stairs when they came to help. I even helped the killer destroy the evidence. When my husband learned that his entire family got killed, he broke down in tears. He grabbed me by the collar and demanded, "Why? Why would you do this?" I deliberately waved photographs of his family's gruesome deaths in front of him and burst into laughter. "Why?" I sneered. "Because they deserved it. My parents begged me to cooperate so I wouldn't be sentenced to death. Instead, I publicly severed all ties with them." Meanwhile, the murderer who escaped justice struck again, claiming another victim. As public outrage reached its peak, I was selected for the memory extraction program. Before the sentence was carried out, my husband asked me one final time, "The memory extraction system is still a prototype. You could die during the procedure. Tell us the truth now, and there's still a chance to make things right." I slowly raised my head to look at him. "You're not getting a single word out of me." The crowd instantly erupted. People shouted that a worthless life like mine deserved to die. But when my memories were finally extracted, they were the ones crying and begging someone to save me. I lay in my cell, waiting for the final judgment. My husband, Daniel Shaw, entered in silence with the execution officers. The moment one of them unlocked the shackles on my body, I gathered every ounce of strength and hurled myself toward the wall. Daniel lunged forward and barely managed to grab me, but I still slammed into it. Blood ran down my cheek and dripped onto the floor. Daniel yanked me up by the hair, his movements rough and merciless. His voice trembled as he demanded, "You want to die that badly? You'd rather die than tell the truth, is that it?" Even so, I forced myself to lift my head and meet his gaze. "Yes. You'll never get a single word out of me." The eyes that were once filled with love now held nothing but seething hatred. Despite trying to restrain himself, he finally lost control and slapped me across the face. "Take her up." The two execution officers immediately stepped forward, hoisted me up like a dead animal, and dragged me toward the judgment platform. They pulled me out of the cell, and the blinding light nearly forced my eyes shut. The judgment platform stood in the center of the square, surrounded by a packed crowd. Among the sea of faces, I saw my parents. They had aged decades overnight, their hair completely white, so worn and haggard that I almost didn't recognize them. Faith. My mother cried so hard she was nearly hysterical as she shouted at me again and again. "Tell them, sweetheart. Tell them the truth." My father stood beside her, unable to say a word. The man who had been strong his entire life was now weeping openly. I bit down hard on my lip until the taste of blood filled my mouth, barely holding back the sting in my nose. Still, I forced myself to appear even colder and pushed them away. "What are you doing here? I have nothing to do with either of you anymore." My mother fell to the ground from the shove and could only stare at me in disbelief. The crowd below erupted into even greater fury. "Kill her. A heartless ingrate like her deserves to be torn apart." The execution officer frowned in disgust and shoved me hard toward the judgment platform. I crashed hard onto the cold metal platform. Daniel dragged his crippled leg behind him as he made his way toward me, one painful step at a time. "Faith, the memory extraction system is still a prototype. A steel probe has to be driven through the spine and into the brain. Once it connects to the central nervous system, the pain is beyond anything most people can endure. And the voltage is unstable. It could kill you at any moment." He paused, as if offering me one last chance. "There's still time to turn back. If you're willing to tell the truth, I'll file for the proceedings to be halted." A bitter smile tugged at my lips, bloody foam spilling from the corner of my mouth. "I won't talk." The veins at Daniel's temple bulged, but he swallowed his anger and said nothing. Instead, he personally fastened the restraints around my arms, legs, and torso, securing me firmly to the platform. Then he picked up the steel probe gleaming with cold light and pressed its tip against the center of my spine. Ah! The probe pierced my skin, bored into the bone, and tore through my nerves. The agony was so intense that I nearly blacked out. "Faith! Faith!" My mother's voice rang out from below, shrill with desperation as she screamed my name. "Tell them. Please, sweetheart. I'm begging you. Just tell them." But I clenched my teeth and refused to make another sound, even if it killed me. My refusal to speak made Daniel's gaze turn completely cold. "You're a hopeless monster. Activate the current. Begin the extraction." Electricity surged through my body. Darkness swallowed my vision. The first memory pulled from my mind appeared on the massive screen suspended above the judgment platform. The scene on the screen took place not long after the tragedy. I was gripping a small knife, preparing to slash my wrist. Just then, Daniel burst through the door, rushed over, and pinned me against the wall, knocking the knife from my hand. He searched me from head to toe. To his surprise, he found a family photograph tucked inside my jacket, a picture of me standing together with his entire family. "Give it back." I lunged for the photo like a madwoman, tears pouring uncontrollably down my face. Daniel caught my jaw in one hand and forced me to look up at him. "What is this supposed to be? You're pretending to miss them now? The police said you were the only witness." You saw the killer. Why didn't you tell them? Why? A bitter smile crossed my face. You want to know? Fine. I'll tell you. Daniel unconsciously leaned closer. But in that instant, I snatched the photograph from his hand and tore it to pieces right in front of him. No. Daniel instinctively tried to stop me. I simply flicked my hand and let the fragments drift to the floor, refusing to say another word. He dropped to his knees and gathered the torn pieces one by one, staring at the barely reconstructed faces of his parents and younger sister. The last shred of Daniel's sanity snapped. He lunged forward and wrapped his hands around my throat, then grabbed the knife from the floor and pointed it at me. I closed my eyes. I didn't try to dodge. But the knife never came down. Daniel's gaze fell on my swollen belly. Our child was there. The knife slipped from his hand and clattered onto the floor. He clutched his head in despair, letting out an animal-like howl of anguish. Then, in the end, he turned and charged toward the balcony, throwing himself over the edge. And I simply stood there, watching it all happen. From beginning to end, I refused to say a single word. The memory ended there. My entire body shook violently with convulsions, and the image on the screen faded away. Daniel stared at me, then slapped his hand against his right leg, the one left crippled after the fall. His teeth clenched as he spat out the words, "I hate you. I hate that I didn't kill you that day. And I hate myself." His voice broke. Why didn't I die when I jumped? Tears streamed down my face, but I couldn't say a word. The violent current surged through my nerves, and the memory shifted to the second scene. On the screen, Anne, my sister-in-law, and I were decorating our new home together. Faith. Doesn't this vase look perfect here? My taste is way better than my brother's, isn't it? Anne fluttered around me like a cheerful butterfly, chattering non-stop. Then she mysteriously pulled out a small box. Inside was a beautiful necklace. Faith, I bought this with the allowance I saved up myself. I hope you and my brother stay happy forever. My mother-in-law, Emily, squeezed my hand and passed me a wedding card with a generous check tucked inside, her smile brighter than ever. We're family now. If Daniel ever gives you a hard time, you tell me. I'll set him straight. The whole family huddled together happily and took that photograph. As Daniel watched the laughter and warmth on the giant screen, tears blurred his vision. He rushed forward and grabbed my shoulders, shaking me frantically. Please. Tell me who the killer is. Please tell me. His outburst caused the steel probe fixed to my spine to shift out of place. Pain exploded through my back, as though every bone were being snapped apart one by one. The doctors hurried forward, trying to pull Daniel away. Mr. Shaw. Please calm down. She's going to die. Daniel froze for a moment before releasing me, allowing the doctors to drag him back. But the crowd below erupted in shouts. She deserves it. Let her suffer too. With trembling hands, Daniel pulled out a sheet of paper and held it in front of me. His eyes were filled with desperate pleading. Faith, that serial killer, he's issued another murder warning. At least for the sake of those innocent people, tell us who he is. His voice cracked with emotion, but I only spat a mouthful of blood onto the ground and turned my head away, refusing to look at him. Daniel could only stand up and say to the doctors, extract the memories from the day of the incident. No. One of the doctors stared at the readings on the monitor and shouted in alarm. The extraction is failing. Her brain is violently resisting the process. We have to increase the power. Daniel slowly rose from the floor and walked to the control console. Without a moment's hesitation, he slammed his hand onto the red button. The effect was instantaneous. It felt as though my entire body had been thrown into a pool of molten lava. An unbearable burning pain erupted from my spine and tore through every inch of me. Thick streams of blood began pouring from my eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. Everyone below watched coldly as I endured the torture. Some even spat in my direction. Increase the power. Kill this monster. As my screams grew more and more horrifying, new images finally appeared on the giant screen. The room was dimly lit. Anne's face was pale with terror as she desperately shoved me into a wardrobe. She trembled and mouthed the words to me. Faith, don't make a sound. Whatever happens, don't come out. Heavy footsteps echoed from outside the bedroom. Curled up inside the wardrobe, I clamped both hands over my mouth. A violent struggle soon erupted beyond the door. But only seconds later, all that remained were Shaw's blood-curdling screams and her muffled sobs as she begged for mercy. No one knew how much time had passed before a sliver of light finally appeared. I pushed the wardrobe door open just enough to peek through the crack. And on the other side, I met Anne's eyes. She lay in a pool of blood. Her clothes had been torn away, her arms and legs brutally shattered. She was barely recognizable as a human being. Yet when I pushed open the wardrobe door, she still used her final breath to whisper to me. Faith, live. Run. Those were the last words Anne ever spoke to me. The memory froze there, cut short by my overwhelming resistance and unbearable pain. The entire square fell silent. Then came a tidal wave of outrage. No one had expected that even after being tortured into such a horrific state, Anne was still trying to protect me. Oh my God. She was dying, and she was still telling her to run. This faith is unbelievable. And gave everything for her, and this is how she repays her? How does someone like that deserve to live? With no way to vent their rage on me, some of the crowd turned their fury on my parents instead. You raised a daughter like this. You're no better. They began beating my mother and father. My parents could only curl up and shield their heads as fists and kicks rained down on them. I closed my eyes. I couldn't bear to watch. Daniel collapsed to his knees, sobbing so hard he could barely move. And adored you. Even with her dying breath, she was still worried about you. Faith, how could you do this to her? The excessive voltage had completely destroyed my spine. I could no longer control my body. All I could do was slump helplessly against the chair as tears streamed down my face. My lips parted. In a barely intelligible voice, I managed to force out a single sentence. I'm sorry. The time hasn't come yet. The crowd below didn't catch the second half of my words. They assumed it was nothing more than a hypocritical apology from a dying woman. Hypocrite. What good is sorry now? Just die already. As curses echoed through the square, the memory replay above shifted to another scene. At the time, I had not yet been arrested for destroying evidence, but news of my refusal to reveal the killer's identity had already spread. The families of the other victims came looking for me. More than a dozen of them gathered outside my door. One after another, they dropped to their knees before me, crying and pleading. Miss Dean, we're begging you. Please tell us who that monster is. We'll get on our knees and beg if we have to. Anyone who witnessed that scene would have felt nothing but heartbreak and sympathy, yet I rejected them and turned to leave. The moment I did, a burlap sack was thrown over my head, and I was dragged away. When I woke up again, I found myself tied up inside an abandoned warehouse. Desperate to force the killer's identity out of me, they resorted to torture. They severed the tendons in my wrists and ankles. They used razor blades to slice strips of flesh from my body. They even buried me alive, leaving only my head exposed above the ground. The child growing inside me died because of it. I nearly died as well. But from beginning to end, I repeated only the same words. I'm sorry. Just wait a little longer. The audience erupted into discussion. My God, that's horrifying. They never should have taken the law into their own hands. But she deserved it. She protected a murderer. Still, this should have been handled through proper legal channels. I don't know, the things she said at the end sounded like she was hiding something. Or maybe she's just a selfish ingrate making excuses to save herself. At that moment, the machinery on the judgment platform emitted a piercing burst of static. Mr. Shaw, we can't continue. One of the doctors shouted, the damage to her brain and spine is too severe. The connection is becoming more unstable by the second. We can't extract any more memories. Daniel acted as though he hadn't heard a word. By now, he realized that there seemed to be a reason behind everything I had done. A reason that drove me to this point. Faith, what are you waiting for? Tell me. He crouched down in front of me and asked with genuine seriousness. But it was too late. My brain had already suffered catastrophic damage. Blood and saliva trickled from the corners of my mouth, and all I could offer him was a vacant, foolish smile. The sight of me like that made Daniel reach out, intending to release me from the memory extraction system. The doctors immediately stopped him. She's not going to survive. Even if you take her off now, she'll die. We should use the auxiliary extraction unit and drive the system at maximum power. At least we might get the killer's identity. That final argument made Daniel hesitate. His obsession with the truth overcame the last remnants of trust and love he still held for me. He stood there in silence for a long time. Then, at last, he retrieved the specialized extraction helmet designed for the memory extraction system. Inside the helmet was a specially engineered steel spike nearly 5 inches long. It was designed to bore directly through the skull and force a memory extraction at twice the normal power. With trembling hands, Daniel lowered the helmet onto my head and activated it. The spike punched through my skull and drove deep into my brain. Ugh. Blood-flecked foam spilled from my mouth as my entire body convulsed uncontrollably. While the spike is still holding maximum power. Under the overwhelming surge of electricity, I unexpectedly regained a fleeting moment of clarity. With immense effort, I turned my eyes toward Daniel and forced out my final words. What I needed to do is done. The rest is up to you. The massive screen above erupted into fragmented flashes from different periods of my life, childhood, school, to the years after I met Daniel. Countless memories flickered by in chaotic succession. In the end, the images settled once more on the night of the murders. Under Anne's desperate protection, I climbed out of the wardrobe and escaped through the window. Using the drainpipe, I avoided the killer and made my way into the stairwell on the floor below. The moment my feet touched the ground, I ran into my in-laws, who had been trying to reach us and were on their way upstairs. Faith? The instant Emily saw the state I was in, she pulled me into a hug, her face filled with concern. Oh my God, what happened? Where's Anne? I couldn't speak. I wanted to grab them and get them out of there. But my father-in-law, Jack, had already taken out his phone and was preparing to call the police. Then I heard footsteps coming from the floor above. The expression on my face slowly changed. Without warning, I slapped the phone out of Emily's hand before she could make the call. Before either of them could react, I shoved them both down the stairs. My in-laws tumbled down the staircase. They died on impact. At that moment, a pair of black rain boots stained with blood appeared at the top of the stairs. And I slowly lifted my head to look at their owner. A collective gasp swept through the audience. The killer I paid such a terrible price to protect. The person whose identity I concealed no matter the cost. Was actually. Static crackled across the giant screen suspended above the judgment platform. The black rain boots, wet and gleaming with a sickening crimson smear, stepped down onto the landing. The camera of my memory slowly panned upward, past the hem of a dark, expensive trench coat, past a hand gloved in black leather, until it finally settled on the face of the man who stood at the top of the stairs. He wore gold-rimmed glasses. His hair was meticulously parted, and his expression carried the calm, intellectual refinement of a scholar. The moment his face crystallized on the screen, the entire square fell into a dead, suffocating silence. Thousands of eyes slowly drifted away from the screen, turning with mechanical horror toward the control console of the judgment platform. Standing right there, his hand still resting on the red power dial of the memory extraction system, was the chief physician, Dr. Edward Vance. The clipboard in Vance's other hand slipped from his fingers, clattering loudly against the metal floor. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin a pasty, sickly gray. His eyes, normally so cold and clinical, darted frantically from the screen to the armed guards, and finally to Daniel. "Oh my God." A voice whispered from the front row of the crowd. "It's him. The killer is the doctor. The chief physician." Another murmured, the realization spreading like wildfire through the packed square. He was the one running the program. He was the one trying to erase her. Daniel stood frozen. It felt as though his heart had stopped beating. He looked at the giant screen, then looked back at Dr. Vance. The pieces of a fragmented, horrific puzzle began to slide into place, but his mind frantically rejected them, desperate to cling to the reality he had believed for the past year. "No," Daniel whispered, his voice trembling as he took a step back, his crippled leg buckling slightly. "No, this is a malfunction. The machine is a prototype. Her brain is damaged, she's projecting her pain onto you, Dr. Vance. That's it. It's a hallucination." Dr. Vance swallowed hard, forcing a tight, nervous laugh as he adjusted his glasses. Yes, of course. Mr. Shaw is absolutely correct. The memory extraction system is highly sensitive to the subject's emotional state. Under maximum voltage, her subconscious is desperate to find a scapegoat for her agony. Since I am the one administering the procedure, her mind has mapped my face onto the memory of the killer. It is a classic case of cognitive projection. He turned to the lead execution officer, his voice rising in panic. "We must terminate the extraction immediately. The data is corrupted, and the patient is clearly experiencing severe neurological delusions. If we continue, we risk destroying the equipment." But the crowd was no longer listening. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing into a towering monstrosity of dread. My parents, huddled on the concrete below, stared up at Dr. Vance with a mixture of raw fury and dawning realization. My mother, her face tear-stained and bruised from the crowd's earlier assault, pointed a shaking finger at the console. "You," she choked out. "You're the monster who did this to my girl. You wanted her dead so she could never show us this." Silence. Vance snapped, his professional veneer cracking. "I have a flawless alibi for the night of Shaw's murder. I was performing a highly complex 6-hour craniotomy at Central Hospital. There are over a dozen surgeons, nurses, and anesthesiologists who can testify to my presence. The hospital logs are public record. I never left the operating theater." Daniel's head was spinning. The doctor was right. The police had thoroughly investigated Vance during the initial inquiry. His alibi was ironclad. A dozen highly respected medical professionals had signed off on his timeline. It was physically impossible for him to have been at the stairwell that night. Yet, as Daniel looked down at me, slumped in the chair, blood leaking from my ears and nose, he saw no deception in my vacant, ruined eyes. I was no longer capable of lying. The spike driven deep into my skull had bypassed every layer of my conscious defense. What was on that screen was the absolute, unadulterated truth of my soul. And my soul was pointing directly at Dr. Edward Vance. "Mr. Shaw," the lead execution officer said, his hand slowly resting on the butt of his sidearm as he stepped between Daniel and Dr. Vance. We need to verify the medical logs. If there is even a fraction of a % chance that this memory is accurate, we cannot proceed with the execution. There is no time to verify. Vance shouted, his composure completely disintegrating. He reached for the primary override switch on the console. She is dying anyway. Look at her brainwaves. If we don't finish the extraction now, the criminal's identity will be lost forever. Step away from the console, doctor, the officer commanded, drawing his weapon. Before Vance could touch the switch, a loud static hum erupted from the overhead speakers once more. The memory extraction system, driven by the 5-inch spike in my brain, bypassed the console's manual controls entirely. The raw power of my dying mind was forcing the projection of my final, deepest memories onto the screen. The image on the screen shifted to a dimly lit room inside Central Hospital. Dated 3 days after Anne's murder. On the screen, my past self was standing inside Dr. Vance's private office. I had slipped in through the side door while the hospital was quiet during the graveyard shift. I was frantically searching through his desk drawers, my hands shaking, my eyes wide with terror. Where is it? Where did you put it? My past self muttered on screen. Suddenly, the office door clicked open. I scrambled to hide behind a tall medicine cabinet just as the lights flickered on. Dr. Vance walked into the room, accompanied by a man in a police uniform, the former captain of the local precinct, Captain Miller, who had supposedly retired 6 months ago. Is the cargo secure? Captain Miller asked, his voice low and gravelly. Yes, Dr. Vance replied on screen, removing his surgical mask and tossing it into the bin. The girl's kidneys and corneas have already been matched with the buyers in the capital. The delivery will take place tomorrow night. But we have a problem. What problem? The sister-in-law, Faith Dean. She was there. And hid her in the wardrobe. I didn't find her in time, but she saw me. She knows what I look like. Captain Miller cursed under his breath. Why didn't you clean up properly? If she talks, the entire network is compromised. The donors, the buyers, the doctors. We all go down. She won't talk, Vance said, a chilling smile spreading across his face. I've already spoken to her in-laws, Jack and Emily. They've agreed to handle her. They know that if Faith speaks, their own involvement in the trafficking ring will be exposed. After all, they were the ones who sold us the names of the victims from their charity database. The crowd in the square gasped. Daniel felt the ground dissolve beneath his feet. His breath hitched in his throat, a suffocating weight pressing down on his chest. His parents. The charitable, upper-class Jack and Emily Shaw, who spent their weekends organizing fundraising galas for underprivileged youth, were the ones providing the targets for an organ harvesting syndicate. On the screen, Vance continued, my alibi is set. The surgical team thinks I was in the OR the entire night. They don't know I slipped out through the service elevator during the 2-hour window when the resident took over the suturing. The security logs have been wiped. If Faith tries to accuse me, it will look like the hysterical ravings of a traumatized girl. The memory faded, replaced by a harsh, blinding white light as my brain struggled to maintain the connection. On the platform, Dr. Vance backed away slowly, his eyes wild. It's a lie. She fabricated this. She's a tech genius, she manipulated the system's database. Before she was arrested. Drop to your knees, the police officer roared, pointing his gun directly at Vance's chest. Do it now. But Daniel didn't look at the doctor. He was staring at the screen, his face covered in a cold sweat, his lips parting in a silent, agonizing scream. As the police officers slammed Dr. Vance onto the metal floor and cuffed his hands behind his back, a sudden commotion erupted near the edge of the square. A fleet of tactical police vehicles screeched to a halt, their sirens wailing. A group of high-ranking detectives from the Federal Bureau pushed through the stunned crowd, led by a stern-faced woman holding a heavy leather-bound journal and a sealed evidence bag containing a small, metallic device. We have an emergency authorization from the federal court, the detective shouted through a megaphone as she climbed the stairs to the judgment platform. The execution of Faith Dean is to be halted immediately. We have recovered primary physical evidence from the residence of Dr. Edward Vance. She walked straight past the trembling Daniel and stood before the cameras, holding up the black journal. 10 minutes ago, acting on an anonymous tip containing precise coordinates and encryption keys sent to our federal tip line 3 months ago by the defendant, Faith Dean, our team raided Dr. Vance's private safe house, the detective announced. Inside, we found this, Dr. Vance's personal diary. The handwriting has already been verified by our forensic experts. It contains detailed logs of his stalking, Of Shaw, his obsession with her, and his planning of her abduction. More importantly, it contains the financial ledger of a multi-million-dollar organ trafficking network operating out of Central Hospital. The detective then turned to the tech officers at the console. Plug this in. It was recovered from the same location. She handed over the sealed evidence bag containing a small, heavy listening device. This device was found hidden inside a hollowed-out book in Vance's safe house. It contains encrypted, high-frequency audio recordings of telephone conversations between Dr. Vance and his primary business partners. The tech officer, his hands shaking, plugged the device into the platform's audio output. A harsh static noise filled the square, followed by the clear, unmistakable voices of an older man and woman. Daniel fell to his knees, his hands clutching his head as the voices of his parents echoed through the loudspeakers. The girl from the shelter is a perfect match for the lung transplant, Jack. Shaw's voice said, cold and clinical, completely devoid of the warmth Daniel had known his entire life. We've updated her medical file in the database. Make sure the extraction is clean. We can't have another scandal like the one last month. What about the police? Emily Shaw's voice asked. Are they still taking care of Captain Miller's payments? Miller is taken care of, Dr. Vance's recorded voice replied. But we need to talk about your daughter, Anne. She's been asking questions. She found the ledger in your study, Jack. A long, agonizing silence on the recording followed. Then, Jack Shaw spoke, his voice dropping to a low, chilling whisper. Anne is a good girl. But she is headstrong. If she goes to the police, she will destroy everything we've built. Do what you have to do, Edward. Just make sure Daniel never finds out. And her organs? Vance asked. A waste to let them go to the grave, Emily Shaw replied, her voice steady and unbothered. Sell them to the buyer in the capital. At least her death will bring us some return on our investment. The recording cut off. The silence that settled over the square was deafening. It was a silence born of absolute, crushing horror. The citizens who had spent months protesting outside my cell, the people who had beaten my parents, the families of the victims who had tortured me in that abandoned warehouse, they all stood frozen, their faces pale, their eyes wide, with a shame so deep it felt like a physical weight. They had cursed a hero. They had tortured the only person who was trying to expose the monsters who had slaughtered their children. Daniel slowly lifted his head, his face wet with tears, his eyes hollow and vacant. He looked at Dr. Vance, who was currently being dragged away by federal agents, cursing and spitting at the cameras. Then, slowly, painfully, Daniel turned his gaze toward me. I was still strapped to the chair. The 5-inch steel spike was still buried in my skull, but my eyes were closed now. My breathing was shallow, a thin rasp of air escaping my lips with every passing second. Faith. Daniel whispered, his voice cracking as he crawled toward me on his hands and knees, his crippled leg dragging behind him like a dead weight. Faith, oh God, what have I done? The final memory extraction began to play on the screen, completely unprompted by the console. It was the raw, unfiltered residue of my dying consciousness. The last message I wanted to leave for the world before the darkness took me. The screen showed the night of the tragedy. After pushing Jack and Emily down the stairs to prevent them from signaling Dr. Vance, my past self had run back into the apartment, desperate to find the ledger or any piece of hard evidence to prove what they were doing. But Vance had already arrived, his black boots stepping through the pool of blood at the bottom of the stairs. He had cornered me in the living room, a scalpel in his hand, his eyes gleaming with cold amusement. You think you can stop us, Faith? Vance had whispered, stepping over the broken bodies of my in-laws. Your sister-in-law is already dead. Her heart is in a cooler on its way to the airport. If you say a single word to the police, your husband Daniel will be next. I will personally harvest him while you watch. I was trembling, clutching my pregnant belly, my back pressed against the wall. You won't get away with this. Daniel will find out. Daniel is a fool, Vance sneered. He trusts his parents blindly. If I tell him you killed his family out of jealousy, he will believe me. The police will back me up. The evidence will point to you. You are nothing, Faith. A girl from a middle-class family with no power, no influence. If you try to fight us, I will dismantle your family piece by piece. Your parents, your husband, your unborn child, they will all die. The memory showed me looking down at the small, encrypted voice recorder I had managed to snatch from Jack Shaw's study before the confrontation. It was the only piece of hard evidence that proved the connection between Vance, Captain Miller, and my in-laws. If I gave it to the local police, Miller would destroy it. If I showed it to Daniel, Vance would kill him before he could act. I had to play the long game. I had to make myself the target. I had to draw all the hatred, all the attention, and all the focus onto myself, allowing the federal investigation, which I had secretly contacted via anonymous letters, the time they needed to build an airtight case against the entire syndicate. I hid the recorder. The memory showed my past self kneeling by the potted plant on our balcony, the beautiful, vibrant fern that had helped me plant just weeks before. I buried the encrypted device deep inside the rich soil, beneath the roots, whispering a silent apology to my deceased sister-in-law. I'm sorry, Anne. I have to let them hate me. I have to let Daniel hate me. It's the only way to keep him safe until the truth can be shown to the world. The memory shifted to my arrest. It showed me sitting in the interrogation room, refusing to speak, pretending to laugh, waving the photographs of the crime seen in Daniel's face. Every laugh was a knife in my own heart. Every cruel word I sneered at him was a desperate attempt to drive him away, to make him hate me so much that he would never try to protect me, never try to dig deeper and become a target for Vance's assassins. I had publicly severed ties with my parents to paint them as the victims of a heartless daughter, ensuring the syndicate would have no reason to target them. For revenge. I had endured the torture in the warehouse, letting them sever my tendons, cut my flesh, and bury me alive, because I knew that if I revealed the location of the recorder before the federal agents were ready to strike, Daniel and my parents would be killed instantly. Even when my unborn child died from the torture, I had clenched my teeth and whispered to the empty dark, just a little longer, please, let me hold on. Just a little longer. The memory ended with my face looking directly into the camera, a soft, heartbroken smile on my lips. Daniel, if you are seeing this, it means the trap worked. The memory extraction program was the only place Vance couldn't touch, the only place Captain Miller couldn't delete the files. I had to let you bring me here. I had to let you hate me enough to put the spike in my head. Don't be sad, my love. Your sister's killer is exposed. Your family's victims will have justice. I kept you safe. That's all that ever mattered to me. The screen went black. A collective wail of grief and regret rose from the square. The people who had been screaming for my blood just minutes ago were now falling to their knees, weeping openly. The families of the victims who had tortured me inside the abandoned warehouse collapsed onto the concrete, clawing at the ground in agony, their faces contorted with a guilt so profound it felt like a terminal disease. What did we do? A man screamed, his voice breaking. We tortured an angel. We mutilated the only person who was fighting for our children. My mother collapsed into my father's arms, her screams of agony echoing across the silent square. Faith. My baby. My sweet, brave girl. Oh God, please save her. Somebody save my baby. But the loudest, most broken sound came from the platform itself. Daniel had reached my chair. His hands, slick with my blood and his own tears, frantically tore at the heavy leather straps binding my arms and legs. Faith. Faith, please, he sobbed, his voice high-pitched and hysterical. He grabbed the heavy metal helmet, his fingers slipping on the lock. No, no, no. I put it on you. I did this to you. God, please, let me take it off. With a desperate, animalistic cry, he yanked the helmet upward. The 5-inch steel spike tore free from my skull with a sickening, wet sound. A fresh torrent of dark crimson blood spilled down my forehead, coating my face and dripping onto Daniel's trembling hands. I slumped forward, my body completely limp, sliding out of the chair and into his arms. Daniel held me against his chest, rocking me back and forth like a child. He pressed his forehead against mine, his tears mixing with the blood on my cheeks. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Faith. I was a fool. I hated you. I cursed you. He whispered, his entire body shaking with violent, uncontrollable sobs. You did all of this to save me, and I was the one who pulled the lever. I was the one who killed you. Medical team. Get over here, the lead officer roared, grabbing a first aid kit and kneeling beside Daniel. We need a trauma surgeon. Now. The platform was in complete chaos. Federal agents were securing the area, while the medical staff, their faces pale with horror, rushed forward with a gurney and a portable defibrillator. Her pupils are dilated and unresponsive, the lead medic shouted, shining a penlight into my eyes. We have a massive subdural hematoma and severe spinal trauma from the initial voltage surge. Her heart rate is dropping, 40. 30. Use the defibrillator. Daniel screamed, grabbing the medic by the collar. Save her. If she dies, I'll kill myself right here. Save her. Sir, step back, the medic ordered, pushing him away. Prepare the paddles. Charge to 200. Charging. Thump. My body jolted off the cold metal platform, my limbs twitching weakly before falling flat again. The monitor emitted a long, flat, agonizing beep. No response. Increase to 300. Charge again. Thump. Still, the line remained flat. Daniel fell back against the metal railing, his eyes wide and vacant as he watched the flat line on the monitor. The sound of that single, continuous tone seemed to echo through his soul, tearing away every last shred of his sanity. He looked down at his right leg, the leg he had crippled when he threw himself off the balcony, the leg he had blamed me for. He realized now that he had jumped because of the guilt of his family's deaths, but I had stayed behind to carry the cross of their sins. He had survived the fall, only to become the executioner of his savior. Faith. He whispered, his voice losing all strength as he stared at my pale, blood-stained face. Wait for me, please, don't go alone. 3 months later. The high-backed wooden doors of the federal Supreme Court swung open, and Daniel Shaw was wheeled into the courtroom. He had aged decades in a matter of weeks. His hair was streaked with gray, his face thin and hollow, his eyes carrying the haunted, lifeless look of a man who had already died inside. He wore a simple black suit, his hands folded neatly in his lap. Behind him, the gallery was packed to its absolute limit. Hundreds of citizens stood in silence, their heads bowed. There were no banners, no angry shouts, no protests. The public outrage that had once fueled the city had curdled into a deep, collective shame. At the defense table sat Dr. Edward Vance, flanked by a team of high-priced lawyers, though their faces suggested they knew the battle was already lost. Alongside him were 32 other high-ranking officials, surgeons, hospital administrators, police officers, and wealthy buyers, all implicated by the encrypted record of faith had buried beneath the fern. The federal prosecutor stood up, holding a heavy stack of documents. Your Honor, the prosecutor began, her voice echoing through the solemn courtroom. Over the past 90 days, federal authorities have fully dismantled the organ trafficking network known as the Central Syndicate. We have recovered the remains of 42 victims, and we have secured the medical records of 54 illegal organ recipients. She paused, turning her gaze toward the empty wheelchair sitting next to Daniel. Every single arrest, every piece of evidence, and every confession was made possible by one individual. A woman who endured the hatred of the world, the physical torture of vigilantes, the loss of her child, and the catastrophic destruction of her own body, all to ensure that this syndicate could not hide behind its political and financial influence. The prosecutor turned to Daniel. We call our primary witness, Daniel Shaw. The bailiff pushed Daniel's wheelchair to the center of the courtroom. He did not look at Dr. Vance, nor did he look at the judge. He kept his eyes fixed on a small, silver locket he held tightly in his right hand, a locket containing a photograph of me, smiling, taken before the tragedy. Mr. Shaw, the judge said softly, his voice filled with deep respect. We have your written testimony. Is there anything you wish to add to the record before we pass sentence on the defendants? Daniel slowly lifted his head. His voice, when he spoke, was incredibly quiet. Yet it carried a weight that seemed to press down on everyone in the room. I have nothing to say to the defendants, Daniel said, his eyes slowly drifting toward the ceiling. They are monsters, and the law will deal with them. But I have something to say to the people in this room. To the people of this city. He turned his wheelchair to face the crowded gallery. We called her a monster, Daniel said, his voice trembling. We stood in the square and threw stones at her parents. We cheered when the steel probe was driven into her spine. We demanded maximum power because we wanted to see her suffer. He closed his eyes, a single tear cutting through the hollow lines of his cheek. But she didn't hate us. She didn't speak because she knew that if she did, the people she loved would be killed. She carried the weight of our ignorance, our cruelty, and our sins, and she carried it all the way to the grave. He looked back at the judge, his hand tightening around the silver locket. My parents were the masterminds of this horror. I am the son of murderers. And I was the hand that executed the only innocent person in this entire tragedy. I do not ask for forgiveness, because some things can never be forgiven. The Central Hospital's intensive care unit was quiet, save for the rhythmic, gentle hum of a ventilator. The room was filled with flowers, thousands of white lilies and roses sent by citizens from all over the country, though they had all been placed in the hallway outside. The room itself was kept sterile, cold, and silent. My parents sat on one side of the bed, their hands clasped together, their eyes fixed on the cardiac monitor. They had not left my side in 3 months. My Mother's hair was now completely white, but the frantic, hysterical grief had settled into a quiet, enduring grace. The door clicked open, and Daniel wheeled himself into the room. He stopped beside the bed and looked down at me. My head was wrapped in clean, white bandages. My skin was translucent, almost porcelain, my body incredibly thin beneath the hospital gown. A complex array of wires and tubes connected me to the life support machinery, keeping my heart beating and my lungs expanding. The doctors had managed to restart my heart on the platform that day, but the damage to my central nervous system was catastrophic. The 5-inch spike had torn through my cerebral cortex, leaving me in a deep, unresponsive coma. The brain activity is minimal, the chief neurologist had told Daniel the week before. She is in a persistent vegetative state. Physically, her body is stable, but the person who was Faith Dean is gone. She will never wake up. Daniel reached out, his hand trembling as he gently took my cold, limp fingers in his. He pressed his lips against my knuckles, letting his tears fall silently onto the white sheets. Faith. He whispered, his voice a soft, broken melody in the quiet room. The trial is over. Vance and his accomplices have been sentenced to life without parole. The syndicate is gone. Your parents are safe. They have been cleared of all suspicion, and the world finally knows who you are. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, beautiful necklace, the one and had bought for me with her saved allowance, the one we had seen in the memory. He gently draped it around my neck, tucking it beneath the collar of my gown. I brought Anne's necklace back to you, he whispered. I rebuilt our old home. The potted plant on the balcony, the fern is blooming now. I water it every day. My mother reached across the bed, gently placing her hand over Daniel's. She can hear you, Daniel, she said softly, her voice thick with unshed tears. I know she can. She stayed behind to make sure we were safe. She won't leave us until she knows we are whole again. Daniel let out a long, shuddering breath, leaning his head against the edge of the mattress. I will wait for you, Faith, he whispered into the silence of the room. Every day, for the rest of my life, I will sit by your side. If you never wake up, then I will be your voice. I will tell the world of your love, your strength, and your sacrifice. On the monitor beside the bed, the green line of my heart rate hummed a steady, peaceful 60 beats per minute. In the deep, dark void of my comatose mind, there was no more pain. There was no more screaming, no more smell of blood, and no more cold metal platforms. There was only a bright, sunlit kitchen in a new home, decorated with a perfect ceramic vase. Anne was laughing, fluttering around like a cheerful butterfly, while Daniel walked in through the front door, his legs strong and healthy, a bright, beautiful smile on his face. And I simply stood there, watching them, finally free of the weight of the world.